Mr. Loudon is traveling the United States, trying to wake as many people up as possible. As far as the election is concerned in Oklahoma, it's not even an important issue. We know any person in here's name, if your name was on the ballot with an R by your name, you would be the winner of Oklahoma's 7 electoral college votes compared to Obama. But there are battleground states that are different from Oklahoma. The key is this. You must understand this. Whether it's Van Jones or Mr. Davis or Barack Obama, they're just people that carry an ideology forward. And it's an insidious ideology. It is so contrary to Christianity. It's a spiritual battle, a spiritual fight, so contrary to Christianity and the ideals of our founding fathers. So these names will move on and other names will fill in. And it's important for us to understand that battle and that ideology and what an evil force that it is. And I just am so happy to have a world-renowned expert on that. So please welcome Mr. Trevor Loudon.
Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be in Oklahoma. It's a real heartland state, and I love coming here. You know, this is what I think about when I think about America. People like yourselves. You know, this is really where it's at. So look, I want to get into it. I know a lot of people have to get back to work. I see a lot of familiar faces there. How many people have heard me speak before? Okay, well, yeah, quite a few.
How many have not?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll do my best to make it interesting for those who've heard it before. Okay, I'll get straight into it. I'm here to talk about your president, but I'm here to talk about the wider implications of what he's doing, how it's going to affect your country, but also my country and every other free country in the world. And a lot of Americans ask me why I should even care what happens in your country. You know, I come from 12,000 miles away. Well, there's two basic reasons for it. And one is simple gratitude, because my country is only free because of the huge sacrifice that your fathers and grandfathers and uncles and cousins made in the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway during World War II. Now, only because of that sacrifice was my country saved from Japanese subjugation. There's a lot of gratitude for that. The second reason is related, but a little bit more selfish. It's that Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope for mankind. It really is. If freedom fails here, yet it can't bail out to anywhere else. This is the front line. If freedom fails here, it fails everywhere. A lot of people email me and they say, look, if Obama gets back in again, God forbid, can I come down and live in New Zealand? You know, and I say, look, it's a great country, you'll love it, come down for a holiday, but really you've got to save things here first. You know, my country is on the, 1,000 miles to the north of my country lies Fiji. Beautiful islands, now has a Marxist government. The Chinese are training the Fijian military and building big hydroelectric dams on the island. Fiji is now a Chinese client state. The Australian Defence Minister was recently up in China, and a top official of the Chinese Defence Department said to him, put him right on the spot, he said, now is the time to choose. Are you going to stay under America's protection or come under our protection? And that's the kind of protection that Tony Soprano offers you. You know, that was a very deep veiled threat, and that would not have happened under Reagan or Bush or some previous president. But it's happening now because every ally of the United States is looking at your president and where he's heading and wondering how reliable America is. How reliable is your protection? The Poles and the Czechs lost their missile protection because of your president, and they're not very happy. The Taiwanese and Japanese are very, very worried about this country. What are they going to do? Are they going to develop their own nuclear weapons, or are they going to make peace with China and Russia? And that's what all of your allies around the world are doing, questioning their relationship with your country and looking to to their own futures. So you're losing your allies because of your president. So I want to talk about, basically, to lead into your president, what I call a central secret of communism. And we all know communism doesn't exist anymore, but that's one of its biggest secrets. It actually does.
Yeah.
But really, the big secret of communism is not atom bomb spies and or labour union agitators. It's the ability of a tiny Marxist-Leninist party to get their policies implemented as the law of the land in their country. So a tiny Marxist group can get their policies pushed through the Australian Parliament, or the Japanese Diet, or the British House of Commons, or the American Congress, and get their will enacted to affect millions of people. So how would that happen? Isn't that a little bit far-fetched? I'd like to give you an example from my country for a start. In 1984, we elected a socialist Labour government, and one of the very first things they did was to enact legislation banning nuclear warships from our harbours. And that destroyed, overnight, the Australia-New Zealand-United States military alliance. ANZUS was kaput. So why would a pro-American Western democracy that had been saved by America only 40 years before turn its back on the Western alliance at the most crucial time in the Cold War? This is how it happened. I interviewed a few years after that a New Zealander who had infiltrated the New Zealand Communist Party for our security intelligence services, our FBI. And in 1983, he was given the greatest honour any communist could enjoy. He was sent to Moscow to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning on Leningradsky Prospect. Now, this wasn't a small institution. There were 7,000 students at any one time, some of them on 7-year courses, some of them with one-to-one tutelage. This was a training ground for the future communist leaders from virtually every country of the world. There were Sri Lankans there, and Thais, and Taiwanese, and Argentinians, and Danes, and Cypriots, and Greeks, Canadians, Mexicans, every country of the world virtually, except for one. And that was the main enemy itself, the United States of America. So why were there no Americans training at this institute? Because at some point, your government had told the Soviets that were any Americans caught training there, there would be war. And the Soviets respected that. But what they used to do, they would train Canadians or Mexicans or New Zealanders in the doctrines they wanted promoted, and those people would go and train the American communists. So my friend sat down in a little room with the KGB, with the other 3 members of his delegation, tutors from the Institute. They had a plan. This was the time of when Reagan was getting ready to fight his Star Wars battles, when there was massive anti-nuclear marches through Europe. Reagan was fighting the Sandinista communists in Nicaragua. This was a time when NATO could have broken up. There was a lot of pressure on, height of the Cold War. The Soviets wanted to break away a country from the Western Alliance in the hope that this would have a cascading effect and lead to the destruction of NATO, which would have given the Soviets a free hand in Europe and further afield. So they picked on my country because we're small, we're liberal, socially progressive, a world leader, so we thought, and the communists were very, very strong in our Labour Party, and our Federation of Labour, and our New Zealand Council for World Peace. So they thought, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to sell this? You know, Kiwis love America, they love Americans. How are we going to break them away from this alliance? So they worked out they're going to have to sell it as a patriotic measure. This was going to be Kiwis standing up for peace, Kiwis standing against the nuclear arms race, Kiwis striking an independent course and becoming world leaders for peace. So they worked out all the slogans, all the psychology. They're very experienced at that. And these people, the small group, went back to New Zealand and held a series of secret meetings with the Labour Party, the Peace Council, the Federation of Labour, and they started a campaign. And that campaign only took a few short months. That legislation was in front of the New Zealand Parliament and it passed. And a long-standing military alliance was dead in the water. And it has still not been revived to this day. And that is how it works. And I will tell you, if you ask any Kiwi today, and that's why we call ourselves Kiwis, named after a little bird. You've got the bald eagle, we've got a tiny little bird that eats worms in the forest, but it's very, very cool. No, well, we named it after that too. Well, the fruit came last. But you ask any Kiwi and they will tell you about the anti-nuclear stand. They say, yeah, that was us. We were Kiwis, we stood proud, we stood, stood for peace. And they'll puff out their chest and be very, very proud of what we've done. And not one New Zealander in 100,000 would have any idea that those policies were designed by the KGB in Moscow in 1983. Have no idea at all. So could this sort of thing happen in the United States? The land of the free, land of the brave, most anti-communist country in the world. Could it happen? I'll give you a little example from California. Just a symbolic example. Every year in California they have a Cesar Chavez holiday. Day off work to honour the great labour union leader Cesar Chavez, founder of the United Farm Workers. Cesar Chavez, the man who was trained personally in Chicago by Saul Alinsky, a Marxist agitator to whom your president owes his allegiance, owes his training. Cesar Chavez marched with communists and socialists his entire life. And he marched under the famous slogan, "Se se puede," yes we can. Sound familiar at all? Obama admits that's where it came from. The woman who got that holiday implemented is named Evelina Alarcón, leader of the Cesar Chavez holiday campaign. She got a whole bunch of left-wing movie stars, labour union people, and all her contacts in the California state legislature, and she got that passed. And now she's trying to take it nationwide, and her website proudly lists the endorsement for that campaign of your President Barack Obama himself. But Evelina Alarcón is the leader of the Southern California Communist Party USA, which I'm sure very few Californians realise as they go down to the beach on that holiday. But what about a big, much bigger example, one that's going to affect every individual in this country if it goes forward? That is Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. Now we all know it's not fully socialised medicine yet, but we know where it's going to head if it's allowed to stand. And it must not be allowed to stand. That will socialise between 1/6 and 1/4 of your economy and change your lives forever. And as someone who comes from a country with socialised medicine, you do not want it, I can promise you that. But the father of the socialised healthcare movement in this country is a man called Quentin Young, a retired medical doctor out of Chicago. He's worked his entire life pushing for single-payer socialised healthcare. He set up numerous organisations, numerous networks, campaigned relentlessly, worked with state legislators all over the country, and worked with several congressmen, including John Conyers out of Michigan. And he has got single-payer legislation put before your Congress on several occasions, but it's always failed until 2008, when they fought under Obama, when the Affordable Health Care Act went forward. And there's no surprise that it made progress under Obama, because for many years Quentin Young was Barack Obama's personal physician. He openly claims that he indoctrinated Obama into the ideas of socialised healthcare. He's claimed it on several occasions. He's been his political mentor as well. But more than that, Quentin Young is a 40-year veteran of the Communist Party USA, until he left that organisation to set up a new group, a new Marxist group called Democratic Socialists of America. And incidentally, despite its democratic name, it's a Marxist organisation. One of its leaders is now serving a 17-year jail sentence for spying for the East Germans and the former Soviet Union. And from his jail cell a couple of years ago, he wrote a big article praising, guess who? Mr. Obama. So don't tell me, please, that one man can't change the world, because Quentin Young, this hardcore Marxist from Chicago, is on the verge of changing your country forever. And I will guarantee you that not one American in 100,000 knows that, unless they've read that book there. So that's how it works basically. It's a very simple process. The communists set a policy, and since 1995, all the major labour unions in this country have come under Marxist control, because that was the year that John Sweeney took over the presidency of the AFL-CIO. He's a Marxist, Democratic Socialists of America member, and he removed the anti-communist clause from the AFL-CIO's constitution, and the Marxists have flooded back. Now, every major union in your country is run by Marxists. SEIU, ASCME, NEA, you name it, they own it. So the communists set a policy, they give it to the labour unions, and the labour unions go out and get Democrats elected. And there's hardly a Democrat in this country at any level who does not owe his election to labour union support and money. And he who pays the piper calls the tune. So the Marxists set the policy, give it to the labour unions get the Democrats elected, and they tell the Democrats what policies to put forward, what legislation to put in their State House or in the Congress. If you want to know what the Democrats are going to do tomorrow, read the Communist Party USA's People's World Today, or Democratic Socialists of America's Democratic Left. Because what's on their pages today will be on the floor of your state legislature or your Congress tomorrow. That's how they do it. So, a lot of people say to me that Barack Obama made a great movement. But I will say to you that a movement made Barack Obama. And that movement started in Hyde Park, Chicago back in the 1950s. At that time, the socialists and the communists stopped fighting for a while and got together to form an alliance to take on the corrupt, daily Democratic Party machine that ran Chicago for decades. And they knew they needed support, so they formed a bigger alliance with the black population, the Latinos, and the labour unions of South Chicago. Communists, socialists, Latinos, blacks, labour unions. Does any of that sound familiar? It's where it started. The first person they got elected was a man called Leon Dupre to the Chicago City Council. Leon Dupre was a lawyer, and he became for many years a personal mentor to your president. But back in the 1920s, he used to go down to the local rifle range with his best friend Saul Alinsky to practice target shooting for the communist revolution they thought was just around the corner. In the 1940s, he was going down to Mexico City to visit with Trotsky, the exiled Soviet leader who was then hiding out from Stalin. The next person they elected was in 1983. They got Howard Washington, a pro-communist black lawyer, elected as mayor of Chicago. And Howard Washington filled his administration from top to bottom with Marxists and socialists. Absolutely stacked it. And that lasted until 1987, when he died of a heart attack and the daily machine took over again. Then in 1992, they got Carol Moseley Brown elected to the US Senate out of Illinois, another long-time Communist Party supporter. But she was also very corrupt. She only lasted one term, and then she got kicked out, and Bill Clinton took pity on her and gave her an ambassadorship. And guess where he sent her? Down to New Zealand, my country. It's a great honour. Then in 1996, they elected Barack Obama to the Illinois State Senate. Well, they supported him. He elected himself, really. I'll tell you that soon. And then in 2004, they put him into the US Senate out of Illinois. Then in 2008, by using their networks all over the country, they got him into the White House. And he who pays the piper calls the tune. Barack Obama knows who put him there, and he has been enacting the communist socialist agenda every day of his presidency since. That's what he's been doing. So why is Mr. Obama so keen to work with the old Marxists, you know, these old dinosaurs? Why would he follow their bidding? Well, really, that's how he thinks. That's how he's always thought. The very first mentor to Mr. Obama, a man who guided him from about the age of 11 to the age of 19, was a man called Frank Marshall Davis, a poet, a writer, a journalist, black guy in Chicago in the 1940s, prominent Communist Party member. But he was very well up in the Chicago left, which was a very vibrant scene at the time, at the height of the jazz age. But in 1948, he left all the glamour and glitz behind and moved out to Hawaii, a little backwater in the Pacific, as it was then. But why would he do that? At the time, Stalin had told the American Communist Party to move as many comrades as they could out to Hawaii, because that's where Pearl Harbor was. And they wanted as many spies as they could on the island to monitor the military activities there, and as many agitators as they could get to close the base down. They were also looking towards Hawaiian statehood, because they knew that if they could take over the local Democrat Party, which they certainly did, that would guarantee them 2 more left-wing senators and a whole bunch of left-wing congressmen in your houses of Congress forever. And Hawaii's been a solidly blue state ever since. That is exactly the reason the communists have always backed the Washington DC statehood movement, and why today they back the Puerto Rican statehood movement. It's nothing to do with the rights of Puerto Ricans. It's all about getting more leftist senators and hardcore leftist congressmen in your house, so that Republicans and Conservatives find it ever harder to ever gain a majority. It's just tilting the numbers in their favour. That's what it's all about. But in Hawaii, Frank Marshall Davis was a good communist. He infiltrated the local Democrat Party, held office in the Democrat Party, but he was also working as a journalist for the Honolulu Record, a labour union publication. And his boss was a Japanese-American communist named Koji Ariyoshi. During World War II, Ariyoshi had worked in China with the US Army, with Mao Zedong's communist forces against the Japanese Imperial Army. After the war, Ariyoshi went to New York, where he worked with the Amerasia people. Amerasia was a left-wing magazine staffed by Communist Party members and several known Soviet agents, KGB agents, who worked with your State Department to tilt US foreign policy away from Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist pro-American Chinese towards Mao Zedong's communist pro-Soviet Chinese. And because they succeeded, that small group succeeded, China was delivered to the communists, betrayed to the communists, with implications we're all feeling today. A small group of communists can change world history. They do it all the time. Back in Hawaii, Frank Marshall Davis was under FBI surveillance for 19 years. 19 years. And one of the reasons they were watching him, because he was observed photographing obscure Hawaiian beaches with a camera with telephoto lenses. And they, I think, suspected espionage because they put him on the security index. And that was reserved only for the most dangerous communists. Had war broken out with the Soviet Union, Frank Marshall Davis could have been arrested that very day. That's what the FBI thought of him. But a lot of people say about 1970, this man, the man who had written poems praising Stalin, poems praising the Red Army, poems viciously criticising racist KKK America, was picked out by Stanley Dunham, the grandfather of Barack Obama, as a suitable mentor for this young black kid in Hawaii. And for 9 or 10 years, Frank Marshall Davis had the ear of your president. In Barack Obama's book, Dreams from My Father, Frank Marshall Davis is mentioned 22 times, but always just as Frank, never with his full name. Obama clearly didn't want people to know who he was talking about. But a lot of people have said to me, now by that time Frank Marshall Davis was just a dope-smoking old alcoholic, no big deal, the communist days were way behind him. But as late as 1979, the year that Obama left for Occidental College, Frank Marshall Davis was still listed as an endorser of the American Committee for the Protection of Foreign Born, the leading Communist Party USA front of the time. 2 names below Frank Marshall Davis was another guy listed. His name was Hugh DeLacy. Hugh DeLacy, and I'd like you to remember that for later on. So Barack Obama leaves Frank behind, goes to Occidental College in LA. There he worked with Tom Hayden's radical crowd and also with the Democratic Socialists of America people on campus. Then he went to to Columbia University in New York, where he attended at least 1 and possibly 2 of the annual Socialist Scholars Conferences that were then being organised by Democratic Socialists of America. And these weren't small gatherings, these were 2,000 to 3,000 radicals in a big hall, Marxist labour unionists, radical feminists, black activists, Black Panther people, gay radicals, all gathered together, plotting how to bring your country to its knees. And Barack Obama was right in the midst of it. So then Obama goes out to Chicago. And the reason he chose to go to Chicago, so he says, was he was inspired by the election of the Marxist mayor of Chicago, Harold Washington. He even tried to get a job in his administration. Didn't get that, but he still went to Chicago, where he worked with Acorn and the other radicals of South Chicago. Then he decides to get a law degree, went to Harvard, where he mixed with the pro-Cuban radicals there. And then he went back to Chicago with his eyes on a political career. And there he worked for several years with a woman called Alice Palmer. Alice Palmer got Barack Obama his first job in politics. Alice Palmer was an Illinois state senator. She decided to run for Congress. She employed Obama as her chief of staff, and she said, "You get me elected to Congress, and Barack, you can take my state senate seat." So they campaigned together, worked together over a long period of time, and Alice Palmer took Barack Obama round to meet all the people he had to meet, the labour union people, the fundraisers, etc. She was the woman who took Obama to the famous meeting in the drawing room of former Weather Underground terrorists Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dawn in Hyde Park. Quentin Young, the doctor, was there as well. That was Obama's introduction to the Hyde Park left, the people who started that movement some years before. But Alice Palmer had a little bit of a history. She didn't get her job, by the way. She failed in the primary. Then she said to Obama, "Look, sorry, can you wait a while? I want that state senate seat back." And Obama said, "No, sorry, Alice." And he got her disqualified off the ballot by challenging her signatures, and he got all the other candidates disqualified as well, and was elected unopposed. That caused a little bit of a ruction, but you know, that's politics. So Alice Palmer had a history. In 1980, she was invited, and the invitation cards are pictured in my book, to the first anniversary of the Communist Revolution in Grenada in the Caribbean by that country's Marxist-Leninist dictator, Maurice Bishop. Maurice Bishop was killed 3 years later by his own comrades, and in the ensuing chaos, Ronald Reagan sent troops onto the island to stop what was going to become the second Cuba of the Caribbean. And my friend was training at Moscow when that happened, and I'll tell you what, the Soviets were absolutely spewing at what Ronald Reagan had done. They were livid that he had stalled their plans in the Caribbean. The same year, Alice Palmer was in Prague in communist Czechoslovakia for a meeting of the World Peace Council. Now this is very significant because it was the World Peace Council affiliate, the New Zealand Council for World Peace, that helped organise the anti-nuclear stand in my country. The World Peace Council was the Soviet Union's leading international front. It still exists today. They pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into it. It was the main propaganda front aimed at your military, aimed at destroying NATO, getting your government to cancel its missile plans, any program to improve your military defences, the World Peace Council campaigned against. And this was why the Soviets pumped more money into that organisation than any other front. It was their key jewel in their crown. It had affiliates worldwide, including the US Peace Council, which still exists. That was run by the Communist Party USA, and Alice Palmer served on the executive of that as well, alongside 16 Communist Party members, and Barbara Lee, who is now a Democrat congressman out of California, congresswoman, and was one of Barack Obama's earliest and most vocal supporters. Palmer was also the leader of the Black Press Institute based in Chicago that had connections with the Palestine Liberation Organization and several overseas Marxist groups, but was basically a network of black communist journalists whose job was to sow Soviet propaganda amongst your country's black population, and also to work and influence the Congressional Black Caucus in your conference, and they openly state that. You know, Charlie Rangel, Barbara Lee, John Conyers, all the radical Marxists in Congress. The Black Press Institute, Alice Palmer took 16 of these people in 1985 to the Soviet Union, East Germany and Czechoslovakia, where they had meetings with the editor of Pravda and leading officials in all three of those communist countries. In 1986, Palmer was in Moscow covering that year's conference of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The same year, she was elected North American Vice President of the International Organization of Journalists. That was another one of the Soviet Union's leading front organizations. Her job was to monitor activities for the Soviets in Canada, United States, the Caribbean and Mexico. And it was all about implementing what they called their new information order, which was promoting the concept of media fairness. Media fairness. Who remembers the fairness doctrine? Fairness. I say it enough. Fairness.
Now we know what you're talking
Fairness. Okay. And I ask you, I believe it came from the Soviet Union, this fairness doctrine. But what it was the idea that if you owned a radio station in the United States and you wanted to put a conservative talkback host on for 2 hours in the afternoon, you had to give equal time to a liberal.
Right.
Because it wasn't fair that the conservative would get sponsorship and listeners while the poor dumb liberal sap got neither. As if there wasn't enough liberal media already. And it was only when Reagan abolished that fairness doctrine did conservative talkback become economic, and you had the Rush Limbaughs and the Sean Hannitys and the flowering of the movement that I'm sure educated many of the people here today. And you may wonder why Mr. Obama wants to reintroduce a fairness doctrine and extend it to the internet through what he calls net neutrality. Could it be that he wants to shut your voice down? Yeah. Possibly, surely not. So to put it bluntly, Alice Palmer was a high-level Soviet operative. A high-level Soviet operative involved in at least 2 major Soviet fronts and with intimate relationships with high-level officials in 3 communist bloc countries at least. Went to the Soviet bloc at least 4 or 5 times in that period. And she is the woman who got your president his first job in politics. Frank Marshall Davis, possible Soviet spy. Alice Palmer, definite Soviet agent. No question. So what about today? You know, you're judged by the company you keep, and I was very proud to be judged by this company, I have to say. Very proud. But look, the people around Obama now, I could go on all day about this, but I'll pick 2. The other half of Obama's brain, and even the Liberals call it that, Valerie Jarrett, introduced Obama to his wife, smoothed his way through Chicago politics, huge fundraiser for him, and now sits in the White House as Barack Obama's closest friend and advisor, the most powerful woman in America, without doubt. There is nothing that Barack Obama would not share with Valerie Jarrett. What about her pedigree? Where do her roots lie? Valerie Jarrett's mother is Barbara Bowman, child psychologist out of Chicago. She runs the Erickson Institute, which has had a lot of influence on early childhood education right throughout your country. In 2009, President Obama gave Barbara Bowman an award for her work, and that ceremony was prominently featured in the pages of the Communist Party USA's People's World. The Erickson Institute is named after Erik Erikson. He was an errant disciple of Sigmund Freud. And who remembers the phrase back in the 60s, identity crisis? He's having an identity crisis. That was Erik Erikson. Back in the 40s, Erikson was kicked out. He used to lecture at Berkeley, was kicked out of Berkeley because he refused to sign an anti-communist loyalty oath. He was a lecturer at the time at the California Labor School, the Communist Party's main trade union training school. On the board of the Erickson Institute have sat Tom Ayers, the father of Weather Underground terrorist Bill Ayers, and Bernadine Dawn, the wife of Bill Ayers and a famous terrorist in her own right. Valerie Jarrett's maternal grandfather was a man called Robert Taylor, founder, the first black head of the Chicago Housing Authority. In the early 1940s, he was working in an organisation called American Peace Mobilization, and one of his colleagues was Frank Marshall Davis. But the American Peace Mobilization was agitating your government, lobbying your government to keep out of World War II. They wanted to keep America out of the war. Why did they want to do that? Because at that time, the Soviet Union was allied to Nazi Germany. And they wanted the Nazis to beat Britain. And they wanted America to stay out. They were the biggest peace movement in the country. No war. And they campaigned relentlessly. The Communist Party front, when Hitler betrayed Stalin and attacked the Soviet Union, overnight they changed the name from American Peace Mobilization to American People's Mobilization and became the most pro-war outfit in the country. Get in the war, fight the Nazis. They changed the attack overnight, and that was Valerie Jarrett's grandfather was right involved in that with Frank Marshall Davis. The other half of Valerie Jarrett's family, her late father-in-law, Vernon Jarrett, the last thing he did when he was dying of cancer in 2004 was to issue a court. He was a prominent very prominent Chicago journalist, he issued a call to the black population of South Chicago to get out and vote for Barack Obama in that year's Senate primaries, and they did. Back in 1946, Vernon Jarrett was serving on the Illinois State Executive of American Youth for Democracy. Don't they love these nice sounding names? Youth Wing of the Communist Party USA. 1948, Vernon Jarrett serving on the Publicity Committee of the Packing House Workers Strike Committee. The Packing House Workers were a communist-controlled labour union. They were on strike, and Vernon Jarrett was writing their propaganda and press releases. Serving on that little committee with him was, guess who? Frank Marshall Davis. So isn't it interesting that these two people that are running your country from the White House today can both trace their political lineage back to the Communist Party USA of 1940 Chicago and Frank Marshall Davis. So we'll look at the other half of Mr. Obama's brain, and that doesn't leave very much, really. No, it doesn't. That's David Axelrod, the man who got Obama elected, the man who took a novice senator with a funny sounding Muslim name up against Hillary Clinton's machine and beat her. Now David Axelrod is now running your president's re-election campaign out of Chicago. So what he's known for is kneecapping, blackening the name of his opponents, running them down. And that is why Mitt Romney is now having to face gay haircut scandals and scandals about his time with Bain Capital. Nothing to do with Obama's positive record, it's going to be attacking Mitt Romney. But where did Mr. Axelrod learn his trade? Where did he get his ideas? Well, back in the early 70s, David Axelrod came from a very left-wing family in New York, moved to Chicago to study political science in Hyde Park at the University of Chicago. He was picked up and mentored by two very prominent Chicago journalists-activists, Don Rose and David S. Cantor. Now these guys worked with Axelrod for several years. They got him his first job in journalism, and they all worked together on the second Harold Washington campaign and the Carol Moseley Brown campaign. They were a very tight unit. Don Rose and David S. Cantor, before they started mentoring Axelrod, had run a little publication for several years in Hyde Park, Chicago, called the Hyde Park Kenwood Voices. And it was the voice of the Hyde Park left. It used to carry articles about Quentin Young's trip to North Vietnam during the Vietnam War to give aid to the communists, about his son Ethan's trip to Cuba to cut sugarcane for Castro. It covered the SDS riots in Chicago in 1968 on the side of the communists, on the side of the rioters. And it had a regular column by the local congressman Abner Mikva. Now Mikva was a law professor. He worked in Congress for many years, and he was a vocal, militant opponent of your Second Amendment. He was the most vicious anti-gun campaigner in Congress for many years. After he left Congress, he became openly supportive of Democratic Socialists of America in Chicago, and was for many years at Chicago University a mentor to Barack Obama. He was also a mentor to another American jurist who you all know, and that is Yelena Kagan, who is now serving on your Supreme Court. So, Don Rose, one half of the partnership, Communist Party fronter since the 1940s. The Chicago police file describes him as a dangerous anarchist. He served for many years on the executive of the Chicago Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights, another wonderful sounding organisation, leading Communist Party front of the era, still exists. On the executive with him served Quentin Young, Obama's doctor. The other half of the partnership, David Cantor. His father was Harry Cantor, the leader of the Massachusetts Communist Party in the early 1930s. After serving a year's jail for sedition, Harry Cantor took his whole family, including baby David, to the Soviet Union where they lived for 5 years. And Harry Cantor was given a job by the Soviet regime of translating Lenin's works into English. And you have to be pretty well thought of to be given that honour. So they came back in 1937. By 1946 the family were living in Chicago, and 1948 Harry Cantor bought a communist magazine, because the owner was moving out of the city, and that owner was, of course, Frank Marshall Davis. David Cantor was editing the student newspaper at Chicago University, Communist Party member. By 1960, he was running a little publication company. So what's a communist running a publication company for? It's free enterprise. His partner in the business was a man called Leroy Wolins, another Communist Party member who went on to found Veterans for Peace, yet another Communist Party anti-military front. But the two men were running Transworld Publications, and its job was to distribute communist and Russian literature all over your country, and they were paid a regular subsidy by the Soviet embassy in Washington to do that job. The two men were actually required by your government to formally register as agents of the Soviet Union. Go forward to 1964, and I'm sure there's nobody here that remembers the famous presidential race that year between Barry Goldwater and Lyndon Johnson. Nobody here would be that old, surely. Okay. Well, it was a very pivotal race. It decided a lot about this country. Lyndon Johnson was a Democrat, and he won. And he gave us the Great Society, the biggest expansion of welfarism and federal government power since the New Deal. He basically put millions of black and poor white families in this country on welfare and destroyed their family structures. And we're still feeling the effects of that today. Barry Goldwater was a principled, conservative, constitutionalist Republican. He would have loved the Tea Party, and the Tea Party would have loved him. He was a very, very honourable man. And I would say that had he won that election, this country would be a lot stronger, richer and happier place today.
Yep, no doubt.
But he didn't win, and one of the main reasons he didn't was because he was viciously vilified in the United States press as a racist, a fascist and an extremist. Has anybody here heard those terms in recent times at all? Familiar to you at all?
Yep.
Haven't heard? Yeah, okay, strange that. One of the main sources of the vilification, one of the real pivotal sources of the vilification of Barry Goldwater was Transworld Publications out of Chicago. They were the source of it. This little communist-run, Soviet-subsidised publication company. So your Mr. Axelrod, who's now sitting in Chicago trying to get your president re-elected, got his training at the hands of a Soviet-paid professional black propagandist and character assassin. So you wonder what you're up against with Mr. Axelrod, where he learned his trade. Now that brings me to what I consider as the real agenda of the left. You know, what is it? Is it they want to make you like France, as some people would tell you? Is that their goal for America? Why they get up every day to go to their Labour Union office or their Democrat Party office or their Acorn office? They do that so they can make you into a bunch of croissant-eating white flag ravers? Is that their goal? I don't think so. I want to say what I think their real agenda is, but before I do that, I want to build up a little bit of credibility for an Albuquerque high school math teacher, a retired high school math teacher named Mark Rudd. Now why would I do that? Who is Mark Rudd? Mark Rudd was the brains of the Weather Underground terrorist organisation. He was right up there in the top leadership with Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn. In 1968, Mark Rudd led the famous SDS riots at Columbia University that made headlines all over the world. In 1969, he was in Cuba training under a KGB major. In 2006, Mark Rudd and Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn and Jeff Jones, who was another Weather Underground terrorist leader who incidentally helped write Obama's stimulus package, and Tom Hayden and Angela Davis, who I'm sure you've all heard of, and David Graeber, one of the key founders of the Occupy movement, and a whole bunch of radicals and Marxists and Communist Party members got together to set up a new organisation, and they called it Movement for a Democratic Society. One of those wonderful sounding names they're always coming up with. Movement for a Democratic Society is the adult support network for the new SDS, the New Students for a Democratic Society, that is active on campuses all around your country. They are the people that created Merry Hell at Minneapolis at the Republican Party convention a few years ago. In 2008, MDS set up a subsidiary organisation, a little offshoot, and they called that Progressives for Obama. And that was designed to rally left-wing support behind their candidate. And Mark Rudd endorsed Progressives for Obama. So what I'm trying to say is Mark Rudd is a key leftist in this country, and he knows people personally who have worked with Obama for many years. So when he predicts Obama's agenda and says where he's leading this country, I give him some credibility. I will listen to him. Now in 2008, November, just after the election, President-elect Obama appointed several conservatives to positions in your Defence Department and Defence Administration. And a lot of people on our side of the fence, breathed a sigh of relief. That's good, Maybe he's not such a crazed radical after all. Maybe he's going to play to the centre. Maybe he's going to be a moderate. But the left were absolutely livid. And Mark Rudd's inbox was filling up with emails from irate comrades all over the country. What was our president doing, putting conservatives into the hated military-industrial complex? And Mark Rudd knew he had to settle the comrades down to get them back on board with the agenda. So I wrote a little article, November 28, 2008, still online, in a rag blog out of Austin, Texas, very widely read on the left, run by former SDSs, former weathermen, and a whole bunch of people associated with Cuba. So this is what he wrote to get the comrades back on board. He said, Obama is a very strategic thinker. He knew precisely what it would take to get elected, and he didn't blow it. He knew he had to play to the centre to not scare the media, the Republicans, or to scare centrist voters away. So he has a narrow mandate for change. The economic agenda will stress stimulation from the bottom at times and handouts to the top at others, which I'm sure you'll agree has happened. And never threaten the military budget. They are way too powerful for now. In 2 or 3 years, after 2 or 3 years of this recession, people may begin to discuss cutting the military budget. Now, where are we now, ladies and gentlemen? 3 years in, right? You're worried about your jobs, paying your taxes, keeping your businesses afloat, keeping your kids in college. America is focused on the economic agenda. And while you're doing that, what is smiling Leon Panetta doing at your Defence Department? What is your Secretary of Defence doing to your military? Why is 20% of US federal spending taking more than 50% of the cuts? Why is Mr. Obama talking about cutting the US nuclear arsenal down to 300 nukes when the Russians have thousands of them and the best civil defence system in the world? Why was Mr. Obama caught on a hot mic incident in Korea a few months ago talking to the Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, saying, when I get re-elected, I'll have more flexibility to deal with you? And Medvedev says, yes, I understand. I'll pass your message on to Vladimir. we are with you. With him on what? What has the peace movement that Alice Palmer was involved in, that Frank Marshall Davis was involved in, and many other communists around Obama, what has the peace movement been after for decades? Why have the Soviets been funding that peace movement for decades? They have been after the destruction of your military. Because what stands between the Soviets, the Russians, the Iranians and the Chinese and world domination? You tell me what stands in front of them. The United States government, the United States military, and you taxpayers and your ability to fund them. Nothing else is standing in the way of their world domination. So what do you think would be their number one target? If you're a leftist, what would you be aiming to do? So this is why I think this is serious, folks. This isn't about a depression, because you can survive a depression. This isn't about losing some of your rights, because you're Americans and you'll take them back. But have you ever been in a position where your president and your Secretary of Defence is working to destroy your military? To the point that maybe not only will you not be able to defend your allies, but you won't even be able to defend your homeland. When you'll have little choice but to be incorporated into some sort of United Nations world government scam, or face the combined military might of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela and all their crazed allies. Who's going to defend you then, ladies and gentlemen? Canada? Taiwan? Iceland? So that is why I think this is serious. Now Mark Rudd went on to say, he wasn't quite finished. Obama plays basketball, he says. I'm not much of an athlete, I barely know the game. But one thing I do know is that you have to be able to look like you're doing one thing, but do another. That is why all these conservative appointments are important. The strategy is to feint right, move left. Any other strategy invites sure defeat. Now, isn't that an admission, ladies and gentlemen, that Mark Rudd's president scammed his way into the White House by pretending to be a moderate, but his agenda was always left, and that he has your military firmly in his sights. Firmly in his sights. So that brings me to Smiling Leon himself. Okay? Voted 100-0 through the US Senate, appointed to Secretary of Defence position with 2 years military experience. But he has had a lot of experience as a budget manager. That's what he did in the White House. So why do you think a man with very little military experience, with a lot of budget experience, would be appointed to that position at this time for? His agenda is to smile and be popular while he cuts your military to ribbons and keeps you people on side, and the Republicans. But look at Mr. Panetta's history, and that'll give you some guide to what he's all about. Leon Panetta was a Democrat congressman out of Santa Cruz, California for many years. Now the Santa Cruz Democrat Party is not the same as the Oklahoma Democrats, or the Iowa Democrats, or the Idaho Democrats. It is a far-left, lunatic fringe, nutcase, communist, California Democratic Party. Okay? And Leon Panetta worked his entire career with members of Democratic Socialists of America and other Marxists. He even had them on his campaign committees. Leon Panetta also had a friend in Santa Cruz. Leon and Sylvia Panetta were best friends with Hugh and Dorothy DeLacy. Hugh DeLacy, remember that name? Yep. American Committee for the Protection of Foreign Born, with Frank Marshall Davis. When the DeLacys and Panettas, they went to parties at each other's houses, they were best buddies. When Hugh DeLacy died in 1986, 4 people read the eulogy at his funeral. One of them was Leon Panetta, the other 3 were all members of Democratic Socialists of America. Hugh DeLacy and Leon Panetta shared a series of letters over 9 or 10 years, which I have. Correspondence was going back and forth. Every one of those letters is about how terrible Reagan was for opposing communism in Latin America, how terrible Star Wars was, how US military expenditure had to be cut, and how the US military-industrial complex was way out of control. And that's how Leon Panetta performed in Congress. He was a far-left Democrat, campaigning all the time against Reagan and Reagan's policies of improving your military. That's what he did. And anybody can see that record. And I would just say so. Well, Hugh de Lacy also had a bit of a history. Well, Leon Panetta also should have known when he was sharing all this information that Hugh de Lacy was going down to Nicaragua to visit with the communist Sandinistas, was going to Spain to visit with the Spanish Communist Party. But that didn't seem to worry him. Hugh de Lacy also had a bit of a history. Back from 1946 to 1948, he was a Democrat congressman out of Washington State, Seattle area. And in those days, they used to talk about the 47 states of the Union and the Soviet of Washington. Because it was a communist-controlled state. They had it locked up. Hugh de Lacy spent his entire time in Congress, that's what he was known for, agitating for the United States to abandon Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese and throw US support to Mao Zedong's communist Chinese. And it's not surprising he did that, because all the time he was in Congress, and right up till the early 70s at least, Hugh de Lacy was a secret card-carrying member of the Communist Party USA. Certainly not the first secret communist in Congress, and certainly not the last. That's not me saying that, it's a generally known historical fact. But the devil looks after his own. In 1975, just before he started corresponding with Panetta, Hugh de Lacy met up with an old comrade from the 1940s, a Stanford University academic called John Stuart Service. John Stuart Service used to work in the 40s with de Lacy on Chinese issues. Service was a former member of the Amerasia Soviet spy ring. But John Stuart Service arranged for Hugh de Lacy and Dorothy de Lacy to visit China in 1975, and a month-long, all-expenses-paid trip here of the Chinese Communist Party. While they were in China, they had the chance to visit with two American expatriates. One of them was Frank Coe, then working as a propagandist for the Chinese Communist government, former member of the Amerasia Soviet spy ring. They also met with Solomon Adler, then another former member of the Amerasia Soviet spy ring, at that time working as an advisor to the Chinese intelligence services, a live Chinese spy. Back in the United States, Hugh de Lacy was also corresponding with Don Wheeler, a communist out of Washington State, a former member of the Silver Master KGB spy ring of Washington of the 1940s. He's also corresponding with Victor Perlow from Connecticut, another communist, another former member of the Silver Master KGB spy ring. So Mr. de Lacy, who worked with your current Secretary of Defence for 9 or 10 years, personally knew 4 former Soviet spies, one of whom was a live Chinese agent. Now I wonder if Mr. Panetta, you've got an Air Force base up in, I went there last night, not far away from here. Yeah, up near Enid. I wonder if Mr. Panetta applied for a job as a janitor in that Air Force base. I wonder if he'd passed the FBI security test. What do you think? So, also Mr. de Lacy was serving as a West Coast agent for a Chicago-based magazine called In These Times, Socialist Marxist journal run by a guy called James Weinstein. Weinstein was a former Communist Party member, founder of Democratic Socialists of America, and reportedly peripherally involved in the Rosenberg spy ring of the 1940s, the people who gave Stalin the A-bomb secrets. In 2002, James Weinstein and a whole bunch of Chicago communists set up a big anti-Iraq war peace rally in Federal Plaza in downtown Chicago. And they got a whole bunch of speakers in, and at that rally, one speaker stood out, and he made his name at that rally nationwide as an opponent of the Iraq War. And can you guess who it was? Barack Obama. So please, I repeat my claim. Barack Obama didn't make a movement made Barack Obama. And elements of that movement, many elements of that movement, do not owe allegiance to your country. They owe allegiance to hostile foreign powers. But I don't want to, I don't want to bring you people down or depress you with all of that sort of stuff. I hate to do that. Look, I'm here for a reason. If I thought there was no hope for America, I'd be back in New Zealand right now building bunkers. Okay? But in 2008, in this country, the left thought they had a slam dunk. They had the House, they had the Senate, and they had the White House. All their ducks were in a row. Their agenda was primed, and they were going to steamroll Middle America out of existence once and for all. Once and for all. But in 2009 and 2010, you people here, and hundreds of thousands like you around the country, in the Tea Party movement, the Republican Party, the 9/12ers, you stood up, you stood on your Constitution, you rediscovered American exceptionalism, and you marched, and you campaigned, and you emailed, and you agitated, and you voted, and you stopped the left dead in its tracks. You absolutely brought them to a screeching halt. You took back the House in 2010, you stopped card check, you stopped cap and trade, you slowed down and watered down Obamacare, you brought the leftist agenda to a screeching, grinding halt. And they hate you for it, which is why I love you for it. What you did, when you're in a movement, you don't know you're in a movement. When you're in something big, you often don't know it. Because this is hard graft, You don't see the bigger picture sometimes. But they had this country by the short and curlies. They really did. And you stalled it. You gave your country a second chance. And they think you've gone away now. But you people are now in the state houses, in the county commissions, in the school boards. You're priming out rhino Republicans like Dick Lugar. You are altering the face of the Republican Party, and you are altering the face of the country. And this is 1773 of the Second American Revolution. Okay, this is the early days. You might think it's tough going. You think back to 1773. Most of the country loved Britain or didn't care. A small group of people, farmers and blacksmiths and lawyers and fishermen and seamstresses, united by an ideal of liberty, stood up and took on the greatest empire the world had ever known and bloody well beat them. And how miraculous is that? Would you have been silly enough to bet on George Washington back then? But they did it. They were guided by an ideal. And now your country is facing a similar situation. Only this time the enemy is internal. But you are faced with taking your country back. But now you've got the internet. You've got hundreds of thousands of people. Now, I know a lot of people don't care, but they didn't care back then either. And I talk to a lot of Tea Party folk and Conservatives and 9/12ers around the country, and they'll say to me, "Oh, this is tough going, eh? This is hard work. Nobody's listening, nobody cares, they don't really care about the future of the country. Are we making any headway?" But I come to you as an outsider, and I've been to groups like this all over the country, and I've got to tell you, I am blown away by what you've achieved. Absolutely blown away. Many of you political novices, but in 2 or 3 years, you stalled the left stone dead, and you've started a revolutionary movement that you do not understand the implications of. You do not realise what you've started in this country. And I will tell you, you're not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people all around the world watching what you are doing, because they know if you can take your country back and restore the Republic here, that's going to inspire us to do the same all over the world. So what you are doing is historic, ladies and gentlemen. And I know it's tough, I know it's hard grind, but you think about the next 3 or 4 months. This is going to go on for years, but the next 3 or 4 months is crucial. Can you think of anything, any 3 or 4 months, that your hard work is going to have more effect and more effect on your grandchildren and children's future than the next 3 or 4 months?
Yeah.
Can you think of any time where it's going to be a better investment to work hard in your lifetime?
That's
When is the time to get stuck in, head down, butt up and work hard? Because what you do now is going to affect the future of this country for decades, forever, really. It's a chance to save your country. This is the time to work. So I'm urging you, look, if you don't think, get a bit of perspective, look to the future. You know how you glorify the revolutionaries of the past. You think 200 years' time, there's going to be some kid in front of a civics class in a high school in America. This is going to happen many times. And he's going to puff out his chest with pride, and he's going to look at his classmates, and he's going to say something like, guess what? I did some research into my family background, and I found out my great-great-great-great-grandma and granddaddy, they were in the Tea Party. They were 9/12ers. They saved this country back in the Obama era, back in the early 2000s, when the country was in its greatest peril. They started the Second American Revolution. And we owe the freedom, the prosperity, the liberty we have today because of what they did back then. And can you think of anything cooler to be part of? Can you think of anything cooler than to be part of that revolutionary movement? Is there anything better? Anything you would rather hand on to your grandchildren than to be part of a movement like this?
It's our time in history.
It's your time in history. It really is.
it is.
It is your time. So I just want to say to you folk, I'm so proud of what you're doing. I'm so grateful for what you're doing. So thank you very, very much, and God bless America. Thank you.